Hi, everyone. Welcome. And thanks for braving the rain and coming here. I'm not sure how traffic is right now. My name's Christine Wang, and I work in the Community Connections department here in the Community Ed with Cindy Lopez. And we want to welcome back Shayla because Shayla has been here. I was just getting to know her earlier today. She's one of the founding teachers at Sand Hill, and she was also a former managing director of education. And she's back, and she's now she has a master's in learning disabilities, and she has a private practice focused on EF support for middle school and high school students. So I had a very engaging conversation with her just now, just looking at the framework of executive functioning and how that relates to learning and other challenges that our students face day to day. So it was a really good conversation. I look forward to hearing more. Let me just review a couple things with you. Does everyone know what Children's Health Council does, what we do here? Okay, so we have many parts to this place. We have a school, Sand Hill School, which focuses on kids with learning disabilities, learning differences, and attention challenges. We also have Esther B. Clark School, which is for students who have emotional and behavioral challenges. We also have the center, which is our clinic, where we provide evaluation and treatment. And then most recently, we've expanded our clinic to include an intensive outpatient. We have an adolescent clinic now, and so we also have community education, which is free, a free community ed. And our mission is to remove barriers, to help children learn, and also to support families. We also have support groups. This morning I was in a meeting. We have parent support groups for ADHD, anxiety, learning. So we have that here as well. Right now, these are some of our areas. So we're looking at the whole child, academic, mental health and wellness, the physical development, and the academic learning. These are our 4 areas of excellence: ADHD, learning differences, anxiety, depression, and autism. We also recently merged with Parent Education Network, which is based in San Francisco. And so we're working on developing our programming and extending that from the Peninsula South Bay and also into San Francisco next year. And so that's in development right now. Here are all the different areas: clinical services, community connections, Sand Hill School, Esther B. Clark. We also have a satellite office in Ravenswood as part of our Ravenswood initiative. And so many different pieces. The piece that I want to highlight to you is the EdRev Expo. So if you have this card, this is coming up on April 21st. And for any parent who has a child with learning or attention challenges, this is an excellent resource for anyone. And I'm not sure, have people attended? Okay. If you have never attended this, I highly recommend that you go. I'm trained as a learning specialist. I also do social emotional learning, teach social emotional learning, and this is a phenomenal. This was not in existence when I was as a learning specialist in the schools. And there are so many exhibitors. There's so many people there who can be a resource to you and inform you as you are learning how to support yourself and your family and your children and your team, your school team. So you are part of that school team. So really, it's free this year. Typically there's a charge. And this year, because of our generous donors, we are able to fund this. And so it's free. It's at AT&T Park. You can even, you can drag the kids and they can go play on the field while you go around for 2 or 3 hours and do what you can. We have many strands. So if you're interested, please register. And as of today, I think we have over 1,800 registrants so far. So it's going to be a big event. Okay, great. And I'm going to hand this to Shayla. Thank you, Shayla.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is my first time doing a talk with a handheld mic, So bear with me. I'm going to kind of muddle my way through it. No, I think I'll be okay, but I might switch to that if I need to. So tonight we're going to be talking about technology supports for executive functioning, which is a very big topic that we're fitting into a very small amount of time. So this is going to be a bit of an overview, but I'm hopeful that we'll get some at least general principles to help you think about how technology can be an asset when it comes to executive functioning and not just a distraction. So Christine already gave me a bit of an intro, but I'm a learning specialist. I have my own private practice called Customized Learning Solutions. I'm based in Half Moon Bay, but I see students along the peninsula. I worked here for a very long time. I was a teacher at Sand Hill School, then I moved to the clinic doing evaluations and treatment and executive functioning work. But now I'm private practice full-time. I also work part-time at Nueva School in Hillsborough, supporting their students with executive functioning deficits. A master's in learning disabilities and some bachelor's degrees in related fields. So tonight we're going to start by defining executive functioning fairly briefly, but just to kind of get everyone on the same page of what I mean, at least when we're talking about that. Then we're going to be talking about technology supports around 4 major areas: attention, regulating attention, managing computer distractions, or distractions of any device, I suppose, productivity and task management, which is a really big one, and then organization, but not organization like some of my other talks about binders and backpacks. This is more mental organization because they go hand in hand. And while technology can't necessarily help you manage a binder except to eliminate it by using Google Docs or something, technology can really assist when it comes to mental organization. But I'm a learning specialist, not an assistive tech professional, so I really cannot give a presentation about just tech because I don't really think that tech can stand alone. Downloading an app on somebody's iPad does not suddenly fix a problem. I really believe that any strategy, whether it's low tech or high tech, really has to be structured and thought out and taught and supported throughout its use. So we're going to end with just some basic principles for support when it comes to executive functioning when you're thinking about any strategy that you're implementing, whether it's tech or not. So that hopefully some of these new tools that you might learn about tonight, you can also go home and think about how they could actually be practically integrated into your life or your student's life. Okay, definitions. Executive functions or executive functioning, this is actually a set of skills, not just one single skill, which sort of makes it complicated to talk about because it's this sort of symphony of skills that all come together to make us work well. And it makes us efficient thinkers, learners, and actors. So the word efficient is bolded because you can still think if you have lousy executive functioning skills, and you can still learn and you can still do stuff, but you just might not do it very efficiently. So these skills are really what come together to make us be able to execute a plan well and pay attention to the things we're supposed to be paying attention to. So I've split it up into a few areas that are not easy to see on there. Everyone can split these up differently because they're so connected and overlapping that it's slightly arbitrary, but I will read you mine. I've got planning and time management, organization, which is physical and mental, self-control and self-regulation, goal setting and problem solving, managing attention, and then working memory and processing speed. If you think about the 4 areas that we're going to be talking about tonight, they don't necessarily map to those because I'm trying to more talk about 4 behaviors or needs, which most of these skills are all going to play a role in productivity or managing your time. What we know about executive functioning skills is that they are complicated, and because of that, they take a super long time to develop. They're in the frontal lobe of our brain, and current research puts full development for the typical person somewhere between 20 and 30 years old. So this is a long developing skill. So when we think about a middle schooler or a high schooler, even a college student, they're working with naturally underdeveloped skills. They just aren't all the way there yet. If you take someone who has some kind of executive functioning deficit, whether from ADHD or anxiety or just low executive functioning skills, you're putting their curve even a little further back. So they're not matching their peers. But it's important to keep in mind that this is a complicated skill that many young adults do not have mastered yet, which I think puts a lot of behavior into a reasonable context when we think about high schoolers and college students and things like that. But it's a big skill. So if you're having dysfunction with your executive system, some of the things that you might experience are difficulty planning out projects, knowing how much time a project is going to take you and what would be involved in doing that project. When speaking, telling a story in an organized way that makes sense to the listener and takes into account what they know. Memorizing information, and then even more importantly, being able to pull that information back out of memory. That comes to that mental organizational piece that we'll talk about. Getting started is perhaps one of the most difficult skills when it comes to executive functioning. Getting started on anything often. Generating ideas independently, so this is like brainstorming, can be really, really hard. And then this last one is working memory. So holding on to information while you're also thinking about it and manipulating it and taking in new information. That's a really complicated process that can be deficient with executive dysfunction. So here we are in 2018 and in the Silicon Valley. Technology is readily available and it has so much potential to do so many great things for our lives, and yet somehow can also sometimes seem to be a detriment and put in new barriers that weren't there before. As much as we want them to break down barriers, it can put up barriers. So it's a complicated issue, but there are technologies that are out there that really can not only compensate for executive functioning skills, but also try to build them too, not just replace them, but really help students practice the development of these skills. I kind of already said this, that technology on its own isn't the magic cure. It has to be paired with these behavioral supports. So that's teaching a student, how do you use this new application or tool? When is it appropriate to use that thing? How do you remember that that app exists on your computer and that you should open it and use it? How do you build that habit? Those are all really challenging things. Whether it's using a paper planner or using a digital calendar, you still have to build the habit of doing that, and that in itself can be one of the most challenging pieces. So we'll talk about that too. All right, we're gonna dive in. I will totally take questions as we go, so if something pops up, go ahead and raise your hand. I just might eventually cut you off if we need to keep moving. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end.
So I have a really quick, yes, it's a pretty yes or no answer, but for the most part, based on the ages that you said, 20 to 30, and this is for children, young adults, such and such, but I'm thinking about, and I don't want to delve, but baby boomers, those of us that are like, careers, whatever, and we have issues with those things as well. So does that mean that because of the age, or is it too late for us to?
Not at all. It's not too late, I promise. Not at all. No, that's an excellent question. So that developmental period is early on, but our brains are amazing and keep growing, and it's totally a muscle. So the more you practice a skill, the better it becomes. And for many people, for the population who isn't just naturally that like super organized, diligent, executive functioning master, it just doesn't come naturally. So sometimes what you just really need is a deeper understanding and, oh, this is why this is not working, and this is what I would need to make it work. I just need to practice getting there. It can totally improve at any age. Yes, 100%. And even if you maybe aren't going to be the most, like, there are people out there who shouldn't be somebody's personal assistant, right? That's like not the skill set that they are born to do. That doesn't mean that some of these technologies also can't help alleviate that little gap you might never be able to bridge, right? Okay, the problem with attention and executive functioning. This is a difficulty with regulating attention. So this isn't that you cannot pay attention. Oftentimes students with ADHD or executive functioning challenges are actually great at paying attention so long as it's something that is stimulating enough and is interesting enough. So it's not a lack of attention, which I think is sometimes the way it's perceived. There's nobody like manning the attention boat. So I like to think of it as a light, and in a classroom setting, you want a spotlight. You want that spotlight on the teacher, and that's all you're supposed to be tuning everything out, and it's right there. They might be in spotlight mode, but the spotlight is somewhere else, or more likely they're in floodlight mode, and everything is kind of getting equal attention. I'm hearing the teacher, but I'm also hearing the kid next to me who's kicking their chair, and I'm hearing what's happening, the conversation that's happening in the hallway out here, and nobody's up there backstage to kind of push me into spotlight mode and put it in the right direction. So it's this regulation and management of attention. So that was the problem. We're going to talk about a couple solutions. So solution number 1 is my lowest tech, assistive tech strategy of the night. This is incorporating movement. So assistive technology is technically any tool that you input to help a kid overcome something. So this doesn't have to actually be tech. We know that those with ADHD, with executive functioning challenges, kind of require this higher level of arousal to engage in something and pay attention. If you think about it as a bucket that needs to be filled up all the way, for me, the teacher might fill my bucket, and I'm like, cool, this is kind of boring, but I understand I need to listen to you. Someone else, that might only fill their bucket halfway, so they need something else to help them reach that stimulation threshold so that they can officially engage. So that's where some like doodling and fidgeting tends to be happening in the classroom, because that little extra stimulation helps get that bucket all the way filled up. So we know that those behaviors that in a classroom can actually be super distracting, that fidgeting, that moving around, they're super functional. They're just trying to fill that bucket all of the way up. So we want to find constructive ways to make that happen. So tech tools for movement would be handheld tools like fidgets, stress balls. There are fidgets that can go on pencils. These are better for younger kids. And then on a more gross motor scale, we've got alternative seating. So the first picture there is a wiggle seat. I think every classroom here has them. You sit on it, and it just kind of allows you you have to balance a little bit more, and you can move around, and that core body movement can be really helpful, and doesn't make any noise. It's just on your chair. It's not very distracting. There's the yoga ball chair, which are great. We're moving up on the distraction in the classroom scale, though. And then the final one is the standing desk, which is, we should probably all be using standing desks. And these, they have these here at Sand Hill too. That bar on the bottom swings back and forth, so they can put a foot on it. So instead of like kicking the kid's desk in front of you, they can swing their feet and also be standing, which allows for a lot more movement. So all of those are technically tech tools, and any way that you can incorporate movement, whether it's in the classroom or at home. So I'm feeling really stuck on this homework assignment. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and go, let's go outside until you can shoot 10 free throws, and then we're gonna come back in and try to get back to work. Or let's get up from the desk and let's go stand at the kitchen counter and try to do this math worksheet, because you just need to get out of this confined space. Yes?
What do you think about music?
While working, I think that it should be lyric free, and I think that students should experiment with it, but I've 100% seen students where it really helps them focus. There are certain tasks that I like to listen to music during, and there are certain tasks that I cannot listen to music doing. So I would encourage thoughtful experimentation with your student or with your child, and asking them, okay, how'd that feel? Was that distracting? How does it feel different when there's words versus not words? What volume level is appropriate? Sometimes headphones are super helpful, because it helps kind of, in addition to playing the music, it drowns out some of that outer noise if you've got that floodlight mentality. It can totally be abused. So it's important to set ground rules, because listening to loud lyric music is probably not, and having the music video playing on YouTube in the window next to you is not a useful tool. which I've seen all of those things, but I think that light music can totally help fill that stimulation bucket.
How can you assess kind of if it's helping or if it's just creating further distraction?
So if it's in the classroom, the teacher can be a very good help for that. And when I was a teacher, it was so much about setting rules. Like I was taking fidgets away constantly if they weren't being used well. And that was just part of the, like, okay, you'll get it back next period, but you've lost your privilege. And at home, same thing, having those ground rules about this is when you can use it, this is how you can use it, this is how you cannot use it. And I think older students, it's pretty hard for anybody lower than 3rd grade to really regulate themselves with a really fun fidget. And the cooler it is, the harder, like fidget spinners, as like cool as they are, they became really cool. So that's not a good tool anymore because now all of your friends want to see it and you think you're pretty cool because you get the fidget spinner. So something that's kind of dull and innocuous is better. And if they lose interest in that, it means that they probably weren't using it in the right way to begin with.
So the movement thing comes up often in this audience. Michael Gurian was giving a lecture last week, and he was talking about how all boys need to be moving because they do better when there's objects and motions, and that really 12 minutes is the max you should expect a boy to sit still. So how do you reconcile that with block period days at public middle school where the kids sit for 60 minutes and don't get up?
Yeah.
How do you take what people seem to know makes sense and implement it into a situation that's not at all receptive to that kind of?
That is the $1 million question. If I had that answer, I wouldn't. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. And so these do feel like hacks, right? We're trying to kind of work around a system that is not conducive to learning for most, let alone a kid who's sort of got the deck stacked in that regard. So I think the realistic, what can you do right now on your very personal level, is the more the student understand, like, this sucks, you shouldn't have to sit this long, and here's why, particularly for you, this is not useful and why you need movement. I think empowering students with knowledge about, like, yeah, this is a drag, you do have to deal with the fact that you have to sit there, but here are some little things you can do to try to make this better. I think helping, and this goes to your question too about the distraction of a tool. If they truly understand what it's for and really do need it, it becomes better utilized. So being able to really help them understand, okay, here are the little things you can do within this system to try to make this a little better. I wish I could change it for you, but I can't. And I'll try. I'll talk to your teacher, and we should always be trying to help move that needle forward, but it is tough. So many of these sort of picked the most accessible tools because there are a lot of cool things out there that are never going to happen in a realistic setting. But it is really, I think, one of the biggest challenges is trying to figure out how to integrate that across the day that isn't necessarily setting you up for that. So this is a more techie solution for regulating attention, and this is a perfect example of one that is really hard to implement unless you've got a great school system that's ready to help or a particularly innovative and excited teacher, because it requires buy-in on, for sure, the teacher level. You can make adjustments to the sound system of a classroom. So we know that the brain can have trouble filtering input, which is why headphones can be useful. It's why preferential seating, putting a kid that has a hard time paying attention at the front of the classroom, is better because there's just fewer things in their field of vision that are going to distract them. We can also play with the sounds that they're hearing. So 2 main approaches to this. One is a whole classroom system. So this is where the teacher has a microphone and there's speakers in the classroom, because you can hear me better if I have a microphone in the back of the room, and I'm a little louder than the kid who's wrestling next to you and the conversation that's in the hall. So it just makes it a little easier for everyone to hear my voice over everything else, and that's just one step further to hoping that you might be listening to me. There's also individual listening devices. So the teacher can wear like a lapel microphone, and they used to go through FM radio, but now we've got Bluetooth. And the student can have just earbuds in, and it's just being Bluetooth directly into that student's ear. Even with the whole classroom system, I'd still put earbuds in that kid's ear if I can, because then that's really all I'm hearing is the teacher's voice. Of course, it doesn't mean I'm actually listening and comprehending everything the teacher is saying, but I'm definitely one step closer, which is what all of these tools are about, is getting us one step closer to the goal. So these are great, and when they're implemented in classrooms, it can make a really big difference for all of the students. And a lot of teachers just don't even know that this is an option. So this is one of those things that's totally worth bringing up at your next 504 IEP meeting or just at your parent conference to say, hey, you thought about that? This would be great to have at this school. Okay, managing computer distractions. Our weapons of mass distraction here. The problem is pretty obvious on this one. There is a widespread use of digital devices for homework now, which in some ways I love. I think it's made a lot of things a lot easier. And in some ways I hate because it makes some things a lot easier too, like going on YouTube or checking my Facebook or texting my friend because my texts are on my laptop too. So for all of the assets of tech, they can become distractions. And if I'm looking at a browser window and I've got a tab with my homework open and I've got a YouTube tab right next to it, the odds of me clicking that tab at some point during my homework adventure are high. I always use the analogy that if there's a plate of cookies right here, I might resist them for a while, but by the end of the night, I am eating one of those cookies. It's guaranteed. The plate of cookies is back there. Maybe I won't, but I probably will still swing by there at some point and grab one. If I don't have any cookies in the house, I'm probably not dragging my butt to the grocery store just to buy ingredients to come home and make cookies, right? The further I can, it doesn't mean I can't, but the further away I am from the temptation, the less likely I am to engage. So we'll be talking about trying to increase that distance between the distraction and the impulse. So we know that students with impulsivity issues, low self-monitoring, in addition to having a harder time resisting the distraction itself, they also have a harder time pulling out once they've started. So once I'm there on whatever the distraction is, I don't necessarily have a strong buzzer in my head that goes off after 5 minutes and says, oh, what am I doing? Back to homework. I might now be there for an hour or longer. Solution number one is to reduce screen clutter. So this is that cookie analogy. I need to remove some of the temptation from my visual field. So some of these are really easy. I cannot tell you how much it drives me crazy that almost every single one of my students, anytime they have their laptop up and a Chrome browser is open, have at least more than 15 tabs open in a single browser. I'm sure some of you do too. It makes me nuts, like absolutely nuts, because for one thing, when they're that small, you can't even see what each tab is, so you're just wasting time clicking between tabs, which is silly. But also, it means that you've probably got your English homework up there, your science homework up there, YouTube up there, some cool thing you were Googling earlier, and who knows what else, and they're all just like right there, begging to be clicked into a more exciting thing than your essay. So I always make students open a new window for the task they're completing. Okay, we're going to be working on homework now. New window. First tab is going to be your school website where they assign your homework. Second tab is going to be your Google Drive. Third tab is the Google document that you're typing into. And those are the only 3 tabs we have open in this window. And ideally it's full screen so nothing else is in your visual field. Does it mean you can't open a new tab and go to the distracting place? No, you can do that very easily, but it's just one step further removed. Installing ad blocking software is also great, just from a functionality standpoint. So many websites we look at are so cluttered, and so it's really hard, even if you have the best intentions of going to the website to try to find a particular thing or read the article that's there or whatever it is, it's going to take you longer than it would if it was just this clean page of the thing you're supposed to be looking at. So that's just good practice in general, is to try to remove some of that visual clutter. Safari and a lot of other browsers have a read-only feature built in. So if you have an iPhone, you can flip into read-only mode. I'll show you a screenshot of it in a second. It really makes a difference to be able to just be looking at what you want to be looking at. There's also third-party apps that can do that for you too, that just remove some of the images, remove all the ads, and just give you a cleaner website. There are also programs that will dim out or put solid blocks over everything but the one window you're working in. So if you don't like to be in full screen, or even full screen is distracting, it can kind of close down what you're looking at. I have a screenshot of that too, I think. Yeah, okay, so here's the Wikipedia page on executive functions. It's not terrible, it's not covered with flashing ads, but if you click that little lined button up at the top and put it into read-only mode, this is what you see. The other window would disappear behind it, but that's just nicer to look at. I'm going to be able to just go straight into reading that article and not be tempted to click on all of those other links, or even just not click on them or think about them, but it just moves your eyes more than necessary, and that is fatiguing, and it is distracting, and it is time-consuming. This is Hazeover, which is a third-party app that does what I was talking about. You can increase that dimness to a total blackout other than what you're looking at, or just kind of dim everything. And I think it's more of a, it's like a psychological strategy just to kind of remind you, like, nope, this is what I'm looking at. We all become so prone to multitasking and saying, like, ooh, I just saw that an email came in. I'm just going to go respond to that one really quickly. 4 minutes, done. But that takes time, and it's hard to get back on task. So this is sort of a nice way to remind yourself that this is the task that I'm on right now, and I will stay on this task. Any questions about those? Yeah.
I was a little confused at first with your term read only. With an engineering background and something else. But in Safari, I see it as reader view.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that is what it's called in Safari, yeah. So solution number 2 is a little bit more of a heavy hitter. So all those first solutions, those require a bit of action on your part, right? I'm going to open the new window now. I'm going to get rid of some of these other distractions. This is for those of us with less self-control. So the best solution for temptation is to get rid of it altogether. So this is where app and web blockers can be very helpful. There are a ton out there. I recommend doing some research on their different features, but most of them work in the same way. You decide on a list of sites or apps, whether it's a web blocker that's going to block websites. If it's an app blocker, it's going to block your access to certain apps that you know are distractors for you. You make a list of those within this program. So you say, okay, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. When you're ready to get into productive mode, okay, it's homework time, I'm going to sit down and do this, or I'm going to sit down and try to clear out my inbox and answer all of my emails. You open the software, you set it for a certain length of time, say, okay, for the next hour, anything on that blacklist is unavailable to me. I can't go, it just says denied when I try to go to that website or try to go to that app. Here are 2 examples. The one on the left, with its very menacing logo that I love, it's called Self-Control. This is a web blocker. It has the blacklist. It also has a whitelist. So if you are feeling like you really need a lot of control, the whitelist, you put the only websites that you can access on there. So if you're like, I need to be on this website the entire time, like I need to be on my website writing blog entries for my blog, for the next hour, it's the only website I can go to start. So that's extra intense. And this one, Self-Control, so far has been the only one that has escaped the hacking skills of my high schoolers. So you can restart your computer, you can do a lot of things, and it still works. And believe me, they will try all of the things. It's like, and every time I say that, they like, challenge accepted. I will try. But it's pretty good. A lot of them are not as good. So do research on that too if you're using it for a kid who's probably going to try to work around it. Freedom is an app blocker, so this is better for a tablet or a phone where you might be entering the Facebook app rather than the Facebook website. So this is a more student-led, like they have to be the one still that goes in and says, all right, for the next however long, I'm setting this, which requires a bit of self-awareness and desire to have self-control on their part. There are also more parent-led options where you can have parental control. So you can say, okay, for this, you can only get 2 hours a day on these apps, and then they shut down for you for the next 24 hours or whatever it is, or just restrict access to something in general. There are a ton of these now, and even some of the like mobile providers are actually building these into their system. So I listed a few that I've heard of and have heard good things about, but there are many. So if you need to be the enforcer, that is also possible. You want the individual themselves to be able to say, I really need to focus, I'm turning this on. But realistically, even if they do that sometimes, they're probably not going to do it as much as they should. And I'm a pretty big advocate, especially for middle schoolers and certainly anything younger than that, of like, the internet's a scary place and there are probably things that they just don't need to have yet and go to yet. So it's nice to be able to have a little bit of control. Same goes for having rules about like, okay, everyone turns in their phones at 9 p.m. and you don't get to have that all night in your room with you. I think that those are totally reasonable boundaries to set at home. And I often ask my kids, I just had this conversation today with a 7th grader. I said, if you were a parent, what would be your rules about? And rarely, if ever, do they say, I think it should, but like they start with a free for all. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. I think about like, I don't have a middle schooler, but I think that if I would, I don't know if I'd be okay with that. And they're like, well, yeah, I don't think that like a 4th grader should have access to it. So they get it. They do recognize that as much as they want to be exempt from that rule. So I think as much pushback as might initially happen, they're reasonable humans too, who I think, I have high schoolers who hated it when their parents enforced a laptop and phone gets turned in, and now they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I wouldn't sleep otherwise. I'm so happy that I have nothing to do after 10 p.m., so I just go to bed. So it's an important and constantly changing conversation that is really overwhelming because it did not exist for any of us, and we don't have, we're figuring it out as we go, but it's important. Any questions on those? Yes.
Are there any programs that are kind of a good combination, as you said, that if you have some younger kids, there's just some stuff out there they just are probably better off not seeing at all.
Yeah.
Right? I like, all the ideas of things to help them get less distracted.
Yeah.
In general, are those 2 different types of apps, or are there some apps which are kind of, you can do some of like both?
Yeah, so the ones that are managed by you, so like our Pact is a good one. You have each user on there, so you have all of the devices, and so you could make different rules for different kids, and some of those are really robust, and so you can have things like you never get access to this, you only get access to this for a set period of time during the day, and this you get access to all the time, but I can just go in here and flip it off, like just turn it off if I feel like you're done for the day and I don't want you to be on that anymore. So they're becoming better and better. When I used to give this talk 4 years ago, I only had a few to pull from, and none of them were that good. So they are, I think the market is catching up with the need, which is great. So I'm sure there are more out there that I don't even know about yet. It would just do some research, but there's those 3 are pretty robust. They have like a pretty serious interface where you can be doing a lot of different kinds of management. Whereas it used to be much more, this does this one does that. We all have the same goal, right? And we're all battling the same battles in just slightly different contexts. So I think the answer is all of the audiences, right? Like I want to take it to the district, I want to take it to the principal, I want to take it to my homeroom teacher, and have everyone at least have some of these things on their radar, because it is super important, and the more integrated all of that is, the easier everyone's jobs become. Okay, we're going to talk about productivity and task management now. So one of the big problems here is initiation, getting started on a task. And we'll talk about some of the main reasons for why that can be challenging, but I could do an entire talk on initiation, so it's a big one. Then once you've finally started, how do you stay on that task and stay focused? Part of that comes into that resisting distraction piece, but also just keeping forward motion and knowing, okay, I did the first step, but what is the second step and what is the third step? And then also task avoidance comes into that too. So sometimes I really know and want to start this, I just can't seem to start it. And other times I know that I should want to start this, but I don't. And so I find other things to do instead. So what I've seen to be true is that when we think about initiation and task avoidance, it is most common on a task that feels overwhelming. Unfortunately, that can be really simple tasks often for those who struggle with some of these deficits. So something that seems like, okay, this is just, we just have to do this math worksheet, let's just get through it. Usually if feet are like if we're dragging feet and we're really stalling and not getting started on something, there's typically a reason beyond, I just don't want to because it's not fun. There's usually some kind of barrier because everyone likes to not have that thing looming over them, and everyone likes to check something off of a list. That feels great. So if you really aren't getting started, there's probably a reason. So the first solution, sort of executive functioning principle that we'll talk about, is breaking things into parts. So big abstract tasks feel very overwhelming. When they are in smaller, concrete, easy to digest steps, it's a little easier to see, okay, I just can focus on this thing right now, then this thing. If you're asking, how do we solve the education system? That overwhelms me. That's a big task. But a really specific question is a little easier to answer, and it's working toward that goal perhaps, but I can sink my teeth into that and get started. I'm going to probably avoid that big overwhelming thing. So one thing to try to help kids think about is if you are sitting down to start homework and that's a really hard time, or you're sitting down at your desk to start work at your job, stack the beginning of your to-do list with some easy things, kind of get you into that flow. We all kind of understand that idea of getting into the groove of something. And so if it's into the groove of work and then once you're cruising, you're kind of in it, don't put the hardest thing at the beginning of your to-do list because then you're not going to start it. So I'm going to answer the easiest emails first to kind of just get me in that email mode, and then I can tackle that big lengthy one because I've like primed my brain. I don't want to start with that one. That's going to make me go do something else. But that's not something that's necessarily coming naturally to a 7th grader. That's something that needs to be taught to a 7th grader. Let's look at your list. This one seems easy. Let's put that at the end, or at the beginning. Let's end with an easy one too, so you feel like there's a easy finish line to get to, and let's pack the middle with the dense stuff, but broken down into some steps. And then confining more abstract tasks. So like my least favorite word to see on a student's to-do list is research. That is the most abstract task ever. How do you research? When are you done researching? Technically never. I could research for 5 minutes, I could research for 5 hours, and there's still more research that I could do. So I need to confine that. Either I'm going to research for 20 minutes, so for 20 minutes I'm gonna look at some websites, or I know that these 3 websites are the most important sources. I will read them to the end. When I've read all 3, I am done researching. But that's now 3 items on my to-do list. Read this article, read that article, read this article, not research, which just feels so overwhelming. But again, not a skill that comes naturally. Like that's something that some adult needs to be sitting with that kid, making that to-do list and saying, ugh, research, I hate that word. How can we be more specific here? Speaking of to-do lists, which is my favorite thing to make in the world, we've got a lot of task manager apps out there to help make your to-do lists and to help make them more concrete and to help alleviate using the, dare I say it, pencil and paper that is so just abhorrent to so many of my students now. The nice thing about some of these task management apps, they allow for really clear deadlines. You can put them in there. They can transfer to a calendar mode, something that your paper to-do list can't do. Some of them allow you to create subtasks. So when we're thinking about what are the steps involved in researching for this project, I can make those 3 little subtasks and they nest nicely. It's a very clear visual way to understand that this is part of this bigger thing. And I might have different due dates for those. I might do 1 article a night because my research is due on Friday. One of them that I'm going to show you has an overdue section. Many of them have some kind of you didn't do this, this isn't off your list anymore, which is really nice. If you think about using a calendar for task management, if you put something on a day, a task, and you didn't do it, that day just blows by. So unless you're in the impressive habit of scrolling backwards in your calendar to look at what you maybe missed the day before, that keeps going, whereas these like keep them. So this is the one that I use and I have a lot of my students use, but there are many out there. This is ToDoist. So on the left, this is not the easiest to see, but so it says history, and there's a bigger task, and then there's subtasks. On the right column here are the due dates for them, and so you can organize by today, which would just show you the things that you have to do for today, or I like to use this next 7 days view, so I can see, okay, here are the things that are overdue. There's a lot of them. They didn't go away. They're still up there until I check them off. I can move them to today if I don't like having them up there, but I think having them up there is a nice sense of, oh, that list keeps getting longer. I need to do something. Today, tomorrow, Thursday, and you can put recurring things on there. So I'll have students make reminders like if every Wednesday you tend to have a science lab, let's just put science lab on every Wednesday or every Tuesday, even better. Yes.
Does this work inside of Google Calendar or is it another program?
So this has a free version. The premium version does link with Google Calendar. The interface needs some work, I will be honest. But yes, it does. It will stack all of those tasks in your calendar. I personally like my calendar to just be events, but that's because my day is full of events. So having a lot of tasks in there is overwhelming to me. I have students that do have it input into their calendar and really like it. I also like that this is, you can go to the website, but I have it on my phone, I have it on my iPad, there's an app for the computer, so it's across device, so that's really nice. So it will sync, there's no more excuse about not having it. I think the biggest pushback I get from students is I have a homework website where people post, my teachers post what I have to do. Why do I need to do this? It's all right there. My argument for that, well, I have many arguments to that, but those websites are fantastic, but very passive. You're just sort of looking at them, and often they're clunky, and you might have to toggle between. Each class sometimes has its own page, and so it's hard to get the like big picture view of how many tasks I have, whereas that overdue section is really clear to me. They're often not super linear. And then the task might be one that spans 2 weeks and has many, many steps that aren't being broken out. So here, this is nice because it allows you to break down the tasks. And I feel that the act of having to input them, just transfer them, you can even copy and paste, you don't have to like type them all by hand, builds the sense that old school filling in your calendar did of holy moly, that's a lot for today. Whereas like kind of scanning this page doesn't necessarily evoke that same feeling because we're super used to scanning really cluttered screens. So it kind of builds this concrete sense of, oh yeah, I did, right, I had that math homework too. I had to kind of read it and actually not just see that it was there, but read it and process what it is and put a due date in for it. Like forces you to more actively process all of that information. So I make my kids transfer it from their homework websites into that. And now I can add the thing that wasn't on the homework website that I also need to do. And then my pitch too is next year, if they start using a different homework website, your system doesn't change. This you can take with you forever. This is just a good system for life. And building that habit of homework time starts by pulling up however many websites I have to check to get all of my homework, transferring them all in, deciding what I'm going to do first. That 10 or 15 minute time is a great initiation time. I'm kind of getting into the I don't have to dive straight into a complicated math problem, but I'm sort of thinking about my afternoon, how bad it's going to be or how long it's going to be. And being planful, that's super great practice for those skills. Some of my kids use this. Google Sheets has a template for an assignment tracker, so it doesn't have to be quite as third party. This is just putting it all in somewhere. The point really is you need to have one place where everything is in a really clear way where you know when it's due. And I recommend that students actually don't put things in on the due date, but put them in on the day they think they might do them. because otherwise you have to get into a really good habit of looking ahead. Oh, I did have a slide on this. This is a new presentation for me. So yeah, we talked about that, why we need to do that, even if you have a school website. So another tech tool for task management are templates. I cannot tell you how many times I have students who every week have to do a current event or a reading response or something like that. And every time they are recreating this template of the heading, and I have to put the topic and the author and the newspaper that I found the article from and all of these things. If you just have the template in a Google Doc and you can copy and paste it into your new document, you have wiped out a lot of time off of your task, and it's a great first checklist item. Copy template, find article, read article, write current event. I can open a new Google document and name it and copy and paste it. You're not going to get a lot of pushback on that task, right? Like that takes 30 seconds. And it just makes the task feel a little less overwhelming than a blank sheet, which is the worst thing to look at. So I have some examples of templates, but really anything that's reoccurring, we can build a template for and just have it there. Sometimes teachers give them to you, and that is excellent. Sometimes we have to build them ourselves, and that's okay. But the kid's not going to do it on their own, so you have to kind of help them build it. There are also workflow apps to kind of help if you're working on a bigger project, sort of see where you are. The first one up there, the first picture, it's called 30/30. This is more time-based. I want to spend 10 minutes on this task, then I'm going to spend 20 minutes on this task. So rather than to completion, I just need to touch everything. And it's kind of fun. It just keeps you on track if you're someone who loses time easily. It's especially good for younger kids. The second one is called Trello, and it's just like a visual task board. I like to organize, you can have like different projects. So this is what one project would look like. And you could have different columns for different pieces of the project, but the way I like to set them up for kids is the first column on there says to do, the second column says doing, and the third says done. So you just drag. I'm dragging this task over from to do to doing. This is the thing that I'm doing. Much like that haze over idea is psychological, like this is the one thing that I am working on right now, or the two tasks if this is a big like work project that's taking a long time. And then you get to drag it over to done. And unlike a checklist that disappears, they like all stack up over there and are done, which is really nice. So if you're a more visual person and don't like that linear list format, this can be nice. Same concept though. Okay, fourth one. We're doing okay. Organization. So organization is a challenge, and physical organization can definitely be a challenge. But mental organization is really challenging too. So our brains, we'd love for them to be like this beautiful filing cabinet that has everything all nicely labeled and categorized and organized and easy to find. But that's not always the case. And if you have trouble with memory, if you have trouble with processing speed, and if you have trouble with organization, things can be filed in a very haphazard way or not at all. So there are a lot of steps involved in this. We've got processing the information in the first place as you're either reading it or hearing it. You've got being able to store that information and preferably store the key ideas from that information, which is a hidden step I didn't even write out, which is just like, how do you figure out what the key ideas are as you're processing? Retrieving that information quickly and accurately. So, okay, I know I learned this. It's in there somewhere, but can I pull it out at a moment's notice? That's the difference between recognition and recall. Recognition is when someone finally says the thing, and you're like, oh, yes, I did know that. That was in there, but I could not find it in my search and just magically bring it up. So on a multiple choice test, you might be okay, but if it's a fill in the blank test, that recognition is not good enough. You need to be able to recall that from thin air. And that's hard and a lot to do. And we have to do that all day in school, all of those steps, all at the same time. So one solution is to use some mind mapping software. So this is Inspiration. There's also a more kid version called Kidspiration. But I think once you're in middle school, the full version is totally reasonable. It has a lot of different cool features that I could also do a whole talk on this tool itself. But one of the things that I think kids are most likely to use and can be really useful is this map building, which is great for brainstorming. So we said that idea generation can be really hard, and then organizing all of your ideas. If you've ever tried to plan an essay with a student, this is a really challenging process. So you can brainstorm, you can put it in this rapid fire mode and just kind of type in things. If we're like, okay, we need to write an essay about dogs, tell me some things about dogs, and you just type them in and hit enter, and they all create these little bubbles. And then I usually use this on the iPad because it's touch and it's really easy. So you can then drag all of those, okay, these things kind of all go together. Let's drag them all in one place over here. These all go together. This idea wasn't very good, we're gonna delete that. Kind of create this map, as you can see in the top picture. It's really nice for the visual learner. You can move things and manipulate things. Oh, I thought this was gonna be a subtopic, but it turns out I really could only come up with one thing for that. Maybe that's not very good. Can I combine these? All of those thought processes become out here and visual and easy to talk about instead of trying to just organize all of that right up here on your own. The coolest thing is that once you create a map, you can hit this one button and it turns into an outline, and it's the greatest. And so now it's super linear and much easier to write an essay from because all of your ideas are in this nice outline. You can create templates on there. I think I have a picture of a template. Yeah. So let's say I'm trying to read a history chapter about I'm reading a history chapter about the Renaissance, and my history, as a teacher, my history book is kind of set up by different time periods. I might have each of my kids on their iPad has inspiration, and I feed to them this template that they have to, for homework, they have to fill this in. But it creates this really nice, okay, I know what I'm looking for. I need to figure out what some of the literature and music and art, 2 things for that. I need to find some inventions, or if I'm trying to do some independent research on a topic, this guides me. You can create, they have a lot actually that are already created on there. So for reading a book and summarizing the book, there'll be characters, conflict, setting, and you just have to fill those in. And it's just a nice visual way to think about it and really easy to manipulate and play with, and you can change them into pictures, and there's lots of cool things you can do with that. But the main feature, like the thing that's working, is you're getting all of that internal processing external. It becomes very visual, very concrete. I can leave it there and come back to it and not forget all of the things that I was thinking about. We want to we'll talk about this in a second, but we need to get things out of our brain. Our brain is the problem. Let's not use it so much. Let's use other things. So digital notebooks, this is one of, I think, the best things about technology is that as we move, as much as I am an analog girl at heart and clung to my paper calendar for a very long time, is pretty nice to have all of your things in one place. And digital notebooks, so the 2 here are Evernote and Microsoft OneNote, which both basically do the same thing. It's like your spiral bound notebook, but it's digital. You can drag anything. I can put a picture in it. I can copy and paste something from the internet. I can type into it while the teacher is talking and add my notes. I can go home and add the notes in. They both have recording features. So if you're using it on a device that can record, it can record the teacher's voice if you got permission to do that. One of the lovely things is that it's searchable. Unlike your paper notebook where you're like, I know I wrote notes on this somewhere. Where is it? I can just search in this and find it. This, I think, is one of those tech tools that I'm wary to push hard because I've yet to see a student fully run with it and be like, I have all my notebooks digitally and they're super organized and I use them all the time. It has so much potential, but this one would take a lot of effort, I think, on the adults in the life to really foster and help. But if you got good at it, it would be lovely. I have not gotten good at it, so I present this with a grain of salt to say this isn't an easy one to implement right away because this takes some practice. But a lot of schools are moving toward using Evernote and things like that now, where you download the worksheet from the internet, from your school website into Evernote, and then you can type in there or write in there or draw your diagram. I mean, there's a lot of really great features, and students are pretty good at using that. There's not as great at then annotating their notes when they come home and dragging in more information from the web, or creating I'm just going to have a cheat sheet for that cool math technique that I learned today. I'm just going to make that and label it how to find the common denominator quickly and refer to that next time I have to find a common denominator. As much as that's the potential, just it takes a lot of commitment to get that far. Yeah.
You were saying about recording the teacher. Does that though kind of has a pen?
That doesn't have a pen, so that's the LiveScribe pen, which I didn't include tonight. It's also similarly unwieldy in process, which is why I didn't include it. Same thing, I have a lot of kids that own those pens, and they're very expensive pens that they don't use. It is the coolest tool. It is really cool, and the potential is so great, but you do have to come home and plug it in and upload it, and ideally listen to the parts that you missed and add in the words that you didn't get typed down, and that takes a lot of time. It is a great tool for a college student. It is not a great tool for an 8th grader. I mean, it's a great tool for a really diligent 8th grader, I guess, but I would not, I wouldn't double down on that strategy if you have sort of a kid you're wrangling. Okay, this is really my favorite part of the talk, because this is not about any particular tech tool, but just what do we do with these ideas, because we've obviously only scratched the surface of tools out there, but whether it's a tech tool or just a strategy you hear, there's a difference between knowing the strategy exists and even owning it and actually using it, which the LiveScribe pen is a perfect example of. Owning it does not make you a good note taker. So I have 5 main principles for how you would support executive functioning across the board. The first one is that we need to make things more external. We've all agreed there's a deficit in the brain that makes it unreliable. The most perfect brain in the world can only remember so many things at a time, can only listen to so many things at a time. We are not computers, we are not robots, we have limitations, and so sometimes we need to externalize. We also need to make things really structured, very visual, very tangible. This third one is that no matter what the tool or strategy is, 90% of the time it's going to be provided by the adult. Some kids are great about spontaneously, like, oh, I saw my friend using this app, I want to do that, but many aren't. And it needs to be taught by the adult, like, how do you actually use this? Things need to be chunked into very explicit pieces. And whatever support you put in, we always, for many of them, especially if we are involved in the support, we want to pull back on that to build independence. And that is like the hardest part, because you have to be very thoughtful and very slow about how you remove those supports. We'll talk about each of these. So externalizing the brain, we do this all the time. A grocery list is an external memory. I can't remember all the things I need to get at the grocery store. I'm going to write it down. Now all I need to do is just remember this piece of paper, which isn't always possible, but we try. It's better than nothing, right? The iPhones are like the most perfect external brain. You've got the camera, you can take a picture of anything, and then it's there. You can write something down. You can search in all of the files that you have. Now you can search in your photos. Like, that's the coolest. It's so great. Externalizing whenever possible for our students is equally important. We do it naturally. We just need to help them do it in ways where we're like, okay, it's not a skill you're strong at. How do we take some of the responsibility off of your brain? Similarly, because this is a brain deficit and in planning and problem solving, we can't really expect kids to plan and solve their own problems in this domain. It's really hard. So we're typically the ones providing the solution. But most importantly, we also really need to structure it and teach someone how to use it. When I taught here, I taught an executive functioning elective to the 8th graders, and we had paper planners, and we together did the planners, and for 6 months, I still got questions about the planner. Where do I write that down? What would I write for that? Do I put it on the day that it's due or on the day I want to do? I'm like, I have answered this. So this was, I think of myself as a very structured, patient, explicit person, because that's my job. And I was blown away by the amount of time it took kids to really fully grasp a calendar, which feels like the most intuitive tool in the world to me. And so it was very humbling and eye-opening that this is what feel like. How often did I in school, I got thrown a calendar at the beginning of the year and said, okay, you've got a calendar, don't miss anything. Don't forget an assignment because now you've got this calendar. That a calendar does not an organized student make. We have to teach that skill. We have to sit down with that kid every day after school and say, pull out your planner. I'm going to make you do it every day, so you might as well start writing in it so that if you didn't write it down, I'm going to make you write it in here, or I'm going to make you put it in your task list, whatever it is. That's a big burden on us, but it is critical to actually building those habits and building those skills instead of like, yeah, I know a calendar exists and kind of how you use it, but I don't use one. Whatever the support is, the more structured and concrete it is, the more visual it is, tangible. That's like my inspiration on the iPad's really nice. I'm tangibly moving this very visual map around while I'm thinking about it. Once you kind of understand the system or the template, so ideally it's the same every time, then you can finally start using it. But so much of learning is wasted on just learning the process, not the actual information. So we want to keep those processes really simple, really structured, ideally the same every single time, so that now you're not really using a ton of brain waves on the process, you're really actually listening to the content, because I know exactly how I use this kind of note-taking template or whatever it is. This is what we're talking about with task management and initiation. Things have to be broken down. This is a big challenge because every time you think you've broken something down into its simplest parts, you haven't. You could do it further. If a kid is getting stuck at a particular step, you just haven't broken it down far enough. And it's often very hard for us to take our adult brains, they're like, this is one thing I don't understand, and actually break it down into smaller pieces. Here's an example. If my Sunday chore list has several, empty the garbages, empty the dishwasher, feed the dog, clean your room, as a single task, clean your room. Clean your room is a super complicated task with different expectations depending on who you ask. I'm sure your kid and you have different ideas of what a clean room officially is. So I don't want clean your room as a single item. I need, okay, clean your room. Here are the 5 things I expect to be done in order for this to qualify as a clean room. For a younger student, making the bed or clearing everything off the nightstand that might be too much. We might have to break that down into further steps. With my kids, when I talk about this, I say, when you were little and you were learning how to brush your teeth or make your bed or something like that, you had to be coached through each step. What do you do first? Get your toothbrush out. Put some toothpaste on it. What's the order? That might have been 6 steps when you were a little toddler learning how to brush your teeth. Now you just think, brush your teeth. That's just a one thing, but it's not. It's multiple steps. So those do become easier. But if there's a hitch, it usually means there's some piece that's too big. It's not been broken down far enough. Academically, same thing. So having time for task analysis and breaking down what an assignment really means is important. So this was a summer assignment a kid had to do. And we read the assignment and said, okay, what are all of the steps? Create the new Google Doc. It's easy first step. Let's load it easy. Now you need to read chapter 1, answer the chapter 1 questions, read chapter 2, answer the chapter 2 questions, submit that Google Doc. How that's always the step that gets missed, I don't know. This was read and answer the questions was what the assignment said. So we had to break this down into lots of steps, which is hard to do and seems very oversimplified and intuitive, but it really does help. So this last one is, okay, so you've got this great system and it's cruising, but it takes a ton of your time or a ton of the teacher's time, and we want to start to make this more independent. This is a really important step to start slowly pulling back, but much like the chunking, it can be really hard to figure out what are the intermediary steps from I do this for you to I don't do this at all for you. How do I find 5 steps in between, which is probably what it's going to take over the course of a year? How do I manage that process and not lose my mind? It's hard. So here is a sample for that website to checklist process. If you've got your school website, we need to move this into some form of checklist, whether it's paper or a task manager or a calendar or whatever. Initially, I do the whole thing. I go on your school website, I update it into your to-do list. All you have to do is look at your to-do list and check stuff off, the fun part. Congratulations. Then I'm writing the checklist, but the kid is going through the website. saying, okay, so for English, I have to read this chapter and then write an essay. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. When do you think you want to do that? I'm asking questions as I go to try to model that process, but they're navigating it, and I'm right there to say, you didn't click on science. Looks like there's something for science. Oh yeah, whoops, sorry. So you're there to find any gaps and fill in the holes. Then, once that seems to be going well, we're going to have them also make the checklist, but I'm still there, and I'm still kind of guiding that process, but they're doing the website navigation, they're doing the checklist. Eventually, I say, hey, time for homework. Why don't you pull up your school website, make your checklist, I'll come back and just make sure you got everything in 10 minutes. And I come back and make sure that's a really big jump, that one. I'm gonna make sure it's all there. And then finally, we create a reminder system that isn't me. There's a Post-it on your computer. An alarm goes off on your phone. Something to say, make your checklist, and then you go through, and every once in a while I kind of check in to make sure the system is operating. That's a lot of steps. It's a lot of time. Like this is not the answer anyone wants to hear, but realistically, I'm looking at 6th through 8th grade to get from step 1 to the end. Like it's a long time, maybe into high school. If you have I would be super impressed if you could get this done in a year, but it's probably not gonna happen. So it's a tough scope, right? Like this is a long process. You might be making that checklist for you might be on step 1 for all of middle school. If you've got a kid that's really has a hard time or super resist, you're battling other things and this is sort of low priority, but you really want to start building that habit. So I think it's an important perspective to keep in mind that this is not a quick one, but having that idea of I want to get to the point where you just come home and pull up your website and make your list and then execute your list would be lovely. But for a while, I might just be focusing on you actually executing that perfect list that I made for you. That's all. I just want you to do the things, let alone make the list. We'll get there eventually. So, quick summary of some of the things we've talked about. You have to understand that things that might seem super simple or super intuitive to you may not to your student. And in some cases, the opposite might be true, where it is also not intuitive to you. And you have a hard time with this task and are kind of muddling through it with your student. They're both pretty challenging challenges, right? If it makes sense to me, it can be really hard to break it down. And if I never figured it out either, how am I going to help you figure it out? It's practice. There are a lot of great books out there that help break some of these things down, and really just sitting with the problem and spending the time on trying to figure it out. And with your kid, engage them in that conversation to say, I don't know. What do you think the steps are involved in this? Can we see if we can break it down? This one feels a little much still. How can we break that down a little further? Having them participate in that process, even if it comes easily to you, is still really important. If at first you don't succeed, try, but eventually you might just need to change your expectations. Sometimes you're trying to skip from step 1 to 4 and you're not realizing it, and you just need to be okay with the fact that you're on step 1 for all of middle school, and that's the case. Sometimes we just have to change the expectation we have. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but don't, beat your head against the wall for too long if it's really not going anywhere. Externalize things whenever you can. Routines, templates, rules, systems, they should be simple, they should be clear, and they should be really consistent. You have to start by modeling the strategy, talking through it. So if I'm making that list, I'm saying everything I'm doing out loud. I'm asking and answering my own questions. This is due on Friday. Seems pretty big though, so I think I'm going to put the first step on Tuesday, and then you can write the other bit on Thursday. Does that feel reasonable? Yeah, okay, great, we're going to do that. Even if I'd already had that plan, I need to say that out loud, so I'm really modeling that thought process. And be flexible. This is not a straight line. This is not an easy process. Be forgiving with yourself. Be forgiving with your child. Be forgiving with the teachers. Everyone is, as you said earlier, everyone's fighting the same battle, and everyone wants the same thing, kid included. Like, everyone wants to feel successful. But it can be really easy to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of the day. So flexibility, sense of humor, forgiveness are all important. And this is sort of, I think I've beat this nail a few times, but technology is great. but it has to be taught. You can't just hand a kid a LiveScribe pen and say, hey, take good notes, figure it out. They really have to have systems built around them. It has to be very clear to the student when you use this, how you use this, why you use this. That's really important. We made it. I have my website here. Almost everything we talked about has a blog entry on my website with lots more information. If there was a tool you were interested in or anything else like that. I'm not taking on new clients right now, so just want to put that out there because I often get a flood after a talk. But I'm always happy to brainstorm or talk or have a parent meeting, talk about things. So feel free to reach out to me. I just might not be able to be your nightly tutor.